last presenter, Yvonne from Royal Holloway. You're going to present alone or because
oh no, that's just academics. Okay. Okay, hi everybody. My name is Yvonne Skipper. I'm currently working at Royal Holloway on a project looking at collaborative learning. But I'm going to present some of the work I did during my PhD today, which I did at the University of Kent with my supervisor, Karen Douglas. And in this research, we were looking at the transition from primary to secondary school. And just to explain where I was coming from when I kind of started thinking about this research, the transfer from primary to secondary school is something we find kind of all over the world. We find it in the UK, find it in the US. It's quite a general transition from a kind of smaller school system, smaller classrooms, where you stay maybe with one teacher across the whole day. You're learning maybe more basic subjects, always with the same teacher. She knows you quite well, she's seeing you all day. You're kind of not competing so much against the national comparison, you're competing against yourself. You want to see improvement in your spelling, in your literacy and numeracy skills. And you go, in the UK particularly, you go from this kind of child-centred environment to secondary school environments, which are usually much bigger. There's a lot more students to deal with. You're dealing with 5, 6, 7 teachers a day, all with their own ideas, their own ways of doing things. You're learning all these new subjects that you've perhaps never studied before. And this can be quite a stressful time for kids. I mean, I remember going to secondary school and there being these giant men with beards who were apparently students and not teachers. It's quite a difficult time for kids, and it leads to all sorts of negative outcomes, such as drops in academic motivation, drops in school grades, increased depression and increased stress. So this is quite a difficult time for kids. And what we wanted to look at was kind of whether the school system, the way the school system, that transfer is designed, leads to better or worse outcomes. So the two transfer systems we were interested in are the geographical streaming system. And this is basically where you're streamed to the school which is closest to your home. So geographically, most of the kids in your class will all go to the same feeder school. So there'll be 3 or 4 primary schools feeding into this secondary school. And on the other hand, you've got a general entrance exam, which is more of the 11+ system. So just for people who aren't aware of that, there's an optional exam. Some kids take it, some don't, and the kids who pass it will go to a certain school which is generally getting higher grades, and the kids who don't pass or don't sit the exam will go to other schools. And whether kids take the exam is generally based, I don't know where that line's gone, it's generally based on whether their teachers think they should take it. So the teachers recommend whether they think that students should take the exam or not. And as I was saying, the top 25% of children who pass this exam, so there's no pass mark, it's just the top 25% are streamed into the grammar schools. And the year when I did this study, they had a 97.7% pass rate in English and maths, compared to the comprehensive schools, which had a 64.4%. So you can see that the grammar schools are generally the higher achieving schools, and this is where the parents are really pushing for their children to get into. So it's quite a difficult time. You know, some of the kids are taking it, some aren't, and it really affects where they're going to go, so the kids will all be split into different groups. So what we were interested in was the effects that these different transfer systems had on this experience of the transfer from primary to secondary. So first of all, we were interested in the difference between this geographical system, just going to the school that's closest to you, compared to this entrance exam system where some of the kids are taking it and some aren't, and whether that affected how you felt about this upcoming quite stressful transition. We were also interested in the differences within the entrance exam system, because like I said, this is an optional exam. So within a class, some children will take the exam and some children won't, based on teacher recommendations. And then within the kids who take it, some are going to pass the exam and some are going to fail. So there's 3 very different experiences there. So we were interested not in the differences just between the 2 systems, but within the entrance exam system. And again, we wanted to see how that affected the feelings about transition from primary to secondary. So I'm just going to go through the types of variables that we were looking at. Obviously, we looked at locus of control, which is very pertinent to this conference itself, because it's the extent to which people feel they can control the events that affect them. So to give you an example, if you had a big test coming up tomorrow, you might feel like you were in control of it. You might feel like, yeah, if I study hard, I think I can do well in this test. Or you might feel like, oh, well, actually, it's probably based on the questions, not really much I can do about it. Teacher doesn't like me anyway, so there's not much you can do. So you've got this continuum from an internal locus of control, I can control what's happening to me, compared to the external locus of control, which is where things are just happening to me and I'm kind of a passive recipient of them. And obviously this internal locus of control is really important, because kids and adults, anybody who feels like they can control things, they take action to make things better. So for example, if they're having a bad experience during the transition, they'd be more likely to take action. I'm struggling, okay, I'm going to ask my teachers for some extra help, or I'm going to tell my family, things like that. Whereas people who have more of an external, they think that things are happening to them, they don't take that action. And so we probably thought that the geographical system wouldn't really raise these issues of control. The whole class is generally transferring together, there's no real comparative group, so it's probably not raising these issues so much. But we thought the entrance exam system would probably have a stronger impact on control. So being told that you can take this exam, that you're being given the opportunity to take the exam, might lead you to have a more internal locus of control. Yeah, I'm having the option of doing something to get to the school I want to go to. And then again, passing the exam might lead to an internal locus of control. I've been given an opportunity, I've worked hard and I've made something happen that I wanted. We also looked at self-esteem. Self-esteem is the experience of being competent to cope with the basic challenges of life and being worthy of happiness. So what we were looking at here was kids with higher self-esteem are more likely again to take action, they're more likely to think they deserve happiness, that they don't deserve to have a really horrible, stressful time. So again, this kind of feeds a little bit into the locus of control, but higher self-esteem is associated with all sorts of positive outcomes, with kids doing better during particularly challenging transition times. And we thought that the geographical system, the kids in the geographical system might experience less change in self-esteem. Again, you're moving with your class, everybody's having quite a similar experience, it might make things a little bit easier on your self-esteem. Whereas in the entrance exam system, there's all sorts of other children, you're all moving to different places. The kids know that some of the schools are higher performing than others. There's obviously the more popular schools, which more kids want to go to. And so being told you can take this exam might increase your self-esteem. Your teachers obviously think well of you. It's the first kind of experience of high school kind of level work. So it might make you feel more positive about yourself. Whereas being told not to take the exam probably would lead to a bit of a decrease in self-esteem, because your teacher doesn't rate your abilities very highly. In addition, we thought that passing the exam might lead to more positive self-esteem. You've managed to pass quite a difficult exam. We're also interested in theory of intelligence. I don't know if some of you are aware of Carol Dweck's work, but basically the idea is that there are two main theories of intelligence which people hold. And these are the entity theory, which suggests that intelligence is a fixed trait. Some kids are just smart, some kids aren't so smart. You know, there's quite a dichotomy. You know, intelligence is something you just have or you don't have. Some people are just smarter than others. On the other hand, you've got the incremental theory, and this is the idea that intelligence is a muscle. The more you work, the harder you work, the more intelligent you become. And the incremental theory is associated with all sorts of positive outcomes. If you believe that intelligence is a muscle, when you experience failure, like all of us will, particularly during this challenging transition when the standard of work leaps right up, you're more likely to keep trying. If intelligence is a muscle, you didn't get it this time, okay, next time I'm really going to work hard and I'm going to improve. Whereas if you have this entity theory of intelligence, you get a lot more, I can't do it, I must be stupid, and disengaging from the task, you know, feeling that they can't actually improve in the future. So you get a lot of self-handicapping behaviours and all sorts of negative outcomes. So we thought that potentially the geographical system might be associated with this incremental theory. All of the kids in your class are going to the same secondary school, they're all being given similar opportunities, so it might be slightly more associated with this incremental theory. Whereas the entrance exam is probably more associated with identity theory, because what you're doing with the children is saying to them, you guys who are passing this exam at 11 are probably going to do better when you're 16, 17, 18. So it does suggest there's some sort of innate quality at age 11 which allows you to judge roughly how well people are going to do in the future. So we thought that probably this might be associated with more of an entity theory. So being told to take the exam might lead to more of an entity theory in particular, because you're being given this opportunity, whereas it would probably be quite maladaptive if you've just been told not to take an exam to hold this entity theory, because it would suggest that you were of a lower ability. And obviously passing the exam might lead you to have more of an entity theory. I've passed it, therefore I must be a bright person, I'm going to this sort of school. But obviously, like I said earlier, this entity theory isn't necessarily a good thing. It can lead to negative outcomes on the experience of failure. And the final variable we looked at was feelings about the school system. So during the transition from primary to secondary, student-teacher relationships become increasingly negative. I'm sure you've all seen the teenagers who don't want to go to school when they go to secondary school. They don't like their teachers as much. They don't feel as involved in the school system. The teachers don't necessarily know them. It's a much bigger environment. And this is really quite important because kids who maintain positive feelings about school and about their teachers are more likely to stay engaged with school. They're more likely to keep turning up. They're more likely to work harder, ask for help if they're struggling, and then perform better in the future. Whereas kids who are maybe feeling more negative about school are perhaps more likely to become disengaged. They don't want to ask for help. They don't feel like school's really doing much for them. And this can be really important because it can obviously affect your future life choices. So again, we thought the geographical system would be less likely to impact feelings towards school. As I've said a couple of times, you're moving with the whole class. Everybody's got a very similar experience, so it's probably not going to raise these ideas about what the school system's doing. Whereas the entrance exam might lead to more of a change. So some of you are going to this school, some of you are going to this school. We've all had the same teaching, but has it been supporting me? Why am I good enough to take this exam? Why do you think that these guys are and I'm not? So we thought that might affect attitudes more. In particular, those who are told to take the exam might feel more positive. Yeah, the school system's doing what's right for me. It's giving me this opportunity to go to this school which I'd like to go to. And passing the exam again. So the school has prepared you, it's given you the opportunity, you've then succeeded. So it might lead you to feel more positive about the school system. So just to reiterate what I've said, we thought probably overall that children in the geographical system would feel more positive about themselves and the transition than kids in the entrance exam system. And then within the entrance exam system, those who don't take the exam or fail will show more negative outcomes than those who pass the exam. So we used 5 schools, 3 in Kent where they have the entrance exam, it's called the Kent test nowadays, and 2 schools in Surrey where they have more geographical streaming. Obviously we tried to match the schools as much as we could, but there is an element of self-selection in this because obviously certain teachers didn't want to be involved in this sort of study because they either loved the 11 plus or didn't love the 11 plus or whatever their feelings were. So there is an element of it, but they are roughly matched in terms of socioeconomic status. And we collected data at 2 time points. So we took the data just before they took the exam, so they decided whether they were going to take it or not. And again, we took it once they just received their exam results. They'd had them a couple of days before when we went back in. Just to explain the types of measures we used, for the locus of control we used the Nowicki-Strickland. This gives kids sentences like, do you feel like there's no point in trying hard as things never work out anyway? And kids just have to say yes or no. There's a whole range of statements. Self-esteem, we use Piers-Harris. This gives kids sentences like, I'm good in my schoolwork, and kids rate yes or no. Theory of intelligence, we use Dweck's measure for this, and this is where kids are given statements and asked how much they agree or disagree. So it says things like, do you think that your intelligence is something about you that you can't really change? And they rate that and agree to disagree. And we wanted to get this idea of the school system, but there wasn't really anything out there that existed yet. So we kind of created a little mini scale, and instead of using the school system, we didn't think the kids would necessarily know what we meant, so we said your teachers and your school, just to make it a little bit clearer for them. So I'm just going to start off discussing some of the results, and this is the entrance exam compared to the geographical system, so no differentiation is made within the entrance exam, it's just entrance exam compared to geographical. So at time 1, just before the kids took the exam, you can see that kids in the geographical system had a more internal locus of control, so they felt like they could control the events, which is associated with positive outcomes, and they also showed higher self-esteem than the kids in the the exam system. So you can see even when the exam's in the offing, it's already having a bit of an impact on everybody within the system overall. There was no difference at this point in terms of theory of intelligence or how they felt about the school system. And at time 2, once the kids within the entrance exam system had received their results, again you can see the geographical kids had a more internal locus of control and slightly higher self-esteem, and the geographical kids liked the school system more. So overall this is kind of suggesting that the geographical system is leading to more positive outcomes, the kids feeling better about themselves, they're feeling more in control of what's happening to them, and they like the school system more. Now we're just going to look within the entrance exam system. So this is time 1 when they're deciding whether to take the exam. So you can see actually just purely intending to take the exam leads to positive outcomes. A more internal locus of control, higher self-esteem, feeling better about the school system. Yeah, it's doing what's right for me because I'm getting this opportunity to take this exam. However, it is also associated at this time point with an entity theory of intelligence like we were discussing earlier. It seems to be kids are picking up on this implicit message that we're deciding how clever you are now and that will let us predict how clever you're going to be in the future. So I think that's quite an interesting finding, that you have all these positive things which would be associated probably with a positive transfer, and yet you're also more likely to have this entity theory of intelligence. Then finally I'm just going to talk about the results at time 2. So this is once the kids have received their exam results. So at this time point you've got the kids who've taken it and passed, the kids who've taken it and failed, and the kids who didn't sit the exam. So I'm going to split them up into different comparisons just to be clear. So the kids who passed the exam had a more internal locus of control and felt more positive about themselves. There was no difference in terms of theory of intelligence, and there was no difference in terms of feelings about the school system. So basically, passing the exam led you to feel better about yourself. It's not really an unexpected finding. Then children who passed the exam are compared to those who didn't sit the exam, so passed and didn't sit. And again, I find the results here quite interesting because, again, passing the exam, you've got the more internal locus of control. You feel in control of your life and you feel better about yourself. But again, you're more likely to hold this entity theory of intelligence, which could set you up for a negative transfer. Whereas kids who didn't sit the exam were more likely to hold this incremental theory. So not sitting the exam seemed to lead the kids to think, well, I'm not going to think about intelligence as a fixed trait because then it already suggests that I'm not going to do well in the future. So they start to think about intelligence as being this malleable, something they could improve if they worked hard. Which is really interesting because it suggests that the kids who are maybe going to the higher performing schools are going to struggle more with this transfer. If they've got this idea of intelligence is fixed, even if you think you've got it, everybody's going to experience some sorts of failure and it's associated with all these negative outcomes. Whereas the kids who haven't taken the exam are kind of thinking about intelligence in potentially a more healthy way, thinking, yeah, if I work hard, I can get better, I can improve. So they might have a slightly easier transfer. And then finally, we compared the kids who didn't take the exam to those who failed the exam. And there were no differences. I thought this was very interesting because there is this idea that kids shouldn't be put in situations where they might fail because it'll be bad for their self-esteem, it'll be bad for all sorts of things. But in this study, we didn't actually find significant differences. So what we're perhaps thinking has happened is almost being told not to take the exam feels like a failure in itself. You're being already told that you're not likely to pass this exam, you're not likely to have the ability to pass it. So I think this is quite an interesting finding because there is this idea, and I have it myself, that kids shouldn't be put, or anybody shouldn't be in a situation where they would fail. But actually, in some ways, giving them the opportunity can, lead to, they might perhaps pass, but even if they don't, that won't lead to any more negative outcomes than not taking the exam. So just to summarise, I know that was a lot of information in a short space of time. Comparing the geographical and the entrance exam systems, results suggest that the entrance exam system leads to more negative outcomes. It leads to more external locus of control. I'm not in control of my life. I don't feel as positive about myself, and I don't feel as positive about the school system when compared to the geographical systems. This suggests that the geographical system is leading to more positive feelings in kids. But again, this is only before they've done the transition. This is feelings about it. It'd be very interesting to actually follow the kids on into secondary school, which wasn't something I could do in this study. Then comparing children within the entrance exam system. So unsurprisingly, passing the exam leads kids to feel better about themselves. But it does appear to lead to the development of this detrimental entity theory of intelligence, this fixed trait theory of intelligence. And finally, there were no differences between the kids who failed and who didn't sit the exam, and I think that's a really key finding in this research. So just the last thing, just to quickly discuss the applications. Obviously the 11 plus exam is gradually being phased out, but it is quite popular with the parents. Like I've said, in these areas there are very big differences between the grammar and the comprehensive schools, so it's very popular with the parents. And the kids can be in tuition for these things for a good year, 2 years beforehand to give them the best opportunity, even though the idea is that you can't be tutored for them. And in this research it suggests that the entrance exam system can have more negative outcomes than streaming them geographically. Also, often young people are discouraged from taking exams because parents and teachers think that failure will have negative effects. But in this research, we found evidence that failing and not being given the opportunity led to similar outcomes. This is something I'd like to pursue in the future and see if it's the case in other exams. So that's everything. Thank you very much.